Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining all of us, and thank you for the panelists to be here with us to discuss the collaborative research journey from community partnerships to publications and public impact. So we're going to start with the introductions real quick, and I'm going to go with Dr. Anderson.
Hi, I'm Dr. Anderson. I'm a scientist at Shepherd Center, which is a rehabilitation hospital for spinal cord injuries and brain injuries in Atlanta, Georgia. And I also have an affiliate faculty appointment with Georgia State University's Department of Sociology.
Joy Appel.
Yeah, that's right. Hi, everybody. I'm Joy Dillard Appel. I am a senior analyst in the Lifelong Communities team at the Atlanta Regional Commission, which is a semi-governmental nonprofit. We'll talk more about that later in the talk. Our focus is on place-based health inequities in the Atlanta region, and I, like Dr. Anderson, maintain an affiliate faculty role in the sociology department at Georgia State.
Hi.
Dr. Oakley.
Hi, I'm Deirdre Oakley. I'm a professor in sociology. I'm also the co-director of the College of Arts and Sciences Center for Neighborhoods and Communities.
Dr. Pashuti.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Pashuti. I'm associate professor in sociology at Georgia State University and associate director of graduate studies.
Thank you, all of you, for introducing yourselves. And let's direct our eyes and let's talk about what motivated you to pursue community engaged research. Who wants to go first? It's open.
I can go first since no one else is jumping in. I'm happy to talk about this. So my experience as a sociological researcher generally sort of taught me the importance of centering community voices to understand the lived experiences of the things that we study in sociology. So it also aligns with my personal values. I'm a feminist standpoint theorist. I like to think of myself as a feminist standpoint theorist. I'm a parent. And I'm a kind of deeply entrenched community member here in the Atlanta region. My family's been here for generations. And I'm a human. And so to me, like this kind of research most aligns with my values.
That's amazing.
I'll go next. So I was trained as an applied sociologist. So my bachelor's and master's are actually from applied sociology programs at Valdosta State University. So those of y'all who are not in Georgia, that's an R2 in South Georgia, and they actually only train people to be applied sociologists. And so it wasn't until my PhD that I was exposed to community-based engaged research. And so sociology to me is applied sociology or professional sociology based on how you frame it. And so after I got my PhD, I spent a couple of years as a professor, and I found myself really wanting to be more in the community in which I was researching. And so I now work at a hospital in the research department where we're actively working with patients on a daily basis. And so the reason that I'm in the more community engaged space is because that's how I was trained and introduced to sociology. Separately, also appreciating and acknowledging, we'll get into this partnership a bit more with academics. I acknowledge and appreciate that academic sociology has some different allowances that those of us in the applied field may not have at the same level. And so I, along with Dr. Pashuti, founded a research lab that really pairs together the academic and applied world in a really meaningful way. So that's really long story long is I'm an applied sociologist because that's how I was initially introduced and trained.
Hey, I can follow that. I am the exact inverse of that. I was trained as a comparative historical sociologist, really sort of understanding sort of the big structural questions, these sorts of things. And that sort of tells you what may or may not be possible, but it doesn't actually tell you what is going to happen at the local level. And so I'm also an urbanist. So in my context, it became very important to me to understand what is the local context that can't be actually totally answered with sort of the big sort of theoretical sort of attack. And so that got me involved in really trying to understand the urban spaces that I was existing within, right? Outside of just being sort of an abstract sort of theoretical project.
Yeah, okay. So I guess we got an alphabetical thing going now. My story is a little complicated because I got my master's degree in urban geography. And the only reason why I went to sociology is because my husband needed to finish his degree, and where I was at the University of Albany, State University of New York, they didn't have a PhD in geography, and so I ended up matriculating into sociology. Meanwhile, I was working at an applied firm called Policy Research. And it was to do with homelessness. So I was out in the community all over the country, doing program evaluations and technical assistance and being the site visit manager type person, while I was working on my PhD. So it just sort of, meanwhile, I was also involved in a zoning battle in Albany where they wanted to put in what's called a damp shelter, which means no drinking alcohol in the shelter, but you can come into the shelter if you're intoxicated. And it was a very contentious battle, and I was involved in it. It did go through. So from the very start, I was doing things in the community. I kind of took a break with my dissertation and did a historical analysis because I was getting a little burnt out. But ever since then, a lot of my work has been in the community, particularly for the last like 19 years that I've been at Georgia State. Virtually not all of my research, but most of my research involves studies of disadvantaged communities. So we're in the community in the Atlanta area.
These are really amazing motivations to be in the field, and I really appreciate you all sharing that. So let's talk about the projects you're working on currently. What projects are you working on? Who are your key partners? I know you're here in pairs, so I would like to our listeners, our audience to know who you're working with right now, what your project is about, and or any project you've worked together before. So a little bit of that.
You might as well keep going with the alphabetical thing.
Sure. So let's start with Dr. Anderson then.
Sure. We would probably take an hour to talk about all the projects I'm on currently, so I'm just gonna hit the highlights on a couple of big ones. We recently wrapped up a large project with Brain Injury Clubhouse. So for people who have brain injuries, the National Institute of Health has changed this to a lifelong condition. It used to be a diagnosis, and that important distinction is really important for these patients and these brain injury survivors. And so we did a big program evaluation study for them. And so if you think you may be interested in the applied world, program evaluation is a really unique and important skill set that many applied sociologists do exceptionally well. And so that's a big project we just finished. We did a multi-phase, multi-mode study, so both qualitative and quantitative, analyzing their electronic health records and then conducting a survey. I did that with Dr. Pasciuti. Separately, just wrapped up 2 major data science and artificial intelligence sprints. So at the hospital, I run analytics for the research department. So I have that distinct pleasure. And I partner with Georgia State University's Master of Science in Analytics program, and do 2 sprints per semester with clinical teams. One was on brain injury, so acquired brain injury, understanding outpatients and how do they get the highest level of independence with certain home exercise programs and visual interventions. The other project was a SCI project where I was the research lead, but a colleague was the driver of that, and they studied SCIM, which is a measurement of severity of spinal cord injury. In both of those projects I just mentioned, they're very driven by a direct question that we're brought in to address. And so the question is generated by either the clinical team or by the community stakeholder. And we figure out all the methods, the data, the timeline, and all of those important nuanced details that sociologists are so great at, and then generate them a deliverable report that uses very complicated analysis but presents it in a very simple way. It's very action-based. The last project I'll mention briefly is something that I actually am the only person at the hospital that works on. So I'm the lead data scientist for the Georgia Trauma Commission, and I do an extensive amount of research that analyzes every single patient in Georgia and the trauma that they experience through like car wrecks, violence. I don't mean psychological trauma, but physical trauma. So brain injury, spinal cord injury, stroke, burn, and do a lot of sub-analysis for them for hospitals and the state of Georgia to change policy surrounding those patient populations. And so all three of these, what they have in common is answering very practical, directed questions with generally very advanced analyses that need to be presented in a simple way that can be used for intervention. So those are three of probably the biggest projects that I've been working on in the last couple of weeks, especially.
Oh, okay, that's amazing. Um, Joy, you want to go next?
Sure, I'm happy to. I realize I didn't set the stage super great for what the regional commission is, and I should maybe do that a little bit before I dive into our work for the folks on the call. So the Atlanta Regional Commission is a state government created organization that fills a lot of different governmental mandates. Some of those are state level, some of those are federal. The part of the organization I work for is the Aging and Independence Services Department, and we are the local area agency on aging. So most of our work involves delivering services to folks who are aging in the region or people who are living with disabilities in the region, mostly aligned with the Older Americans Act, but also with some other program funding sources. My part of the department, as I mentioned earlier, is the Lifelong Communities team. We do more kind of forward-thinking work in the region than we do service delivery. So we partner with a lot of entities inside and outside of the agency. And there are a lot of different mandates that different departments in the regional commission fill that we coordinate with to make sure that they're keeping an age-friendly lens on the work that they're doing. And we try to just coordinate our work, our missions and values. So in that context, the Lifelong Communities team has two main projects that we're working on. One of those is Age-Friendly Communities, which is an AARP program. And the other is our Live Beyond Expectations plan, which is the place-based health equities plan that we use. So neither one of these is true community engaged research. We're not doing true community engaged research. It is very applied work. It's a little bit sort of the opposite of what Dr. Anderson has. So we do very like high level, simple kinds of analysis. So our team is trying to push some of the principles of community engaged research and seeking funding to do projects that do meet the methodological guidelines of true community engaged research to inform those two program plans. Our partners largely consist of county and municipal governments. Hence, that's why it is not true community engaged research, because we have to follow all of the legal guidelines that go with working with those partners. And that's also a lot of county senior services and region serving nonprofits like Atlanta Legal Aid, the Jewish Family and Children Services, and House Proud. Those are some examples of some of our regional partners. We also partner informally with smaller nonprofits or community serving organizations throughout the region. These could be like county level housing providers or food banks, community gardens even, other wraparound service providers, or religious or social institutions. And what that partnership looks like for us is working with them to get access to the communities that we can learn from and to try to connect with resources.
Great. Deirdre? You're muted.
Dan, did you want to go before me? Or do you want me to go?
I'm fine either way, Deirdre. If you want to go, go for it.
Okay. Yeah. I guess I'm just going to talk about an old project because we're writing a book on it now. And I can talk about other ones in question and answer. One thing I want to point out, Dr. Anderson was talking about brain injuries. A fact that a lot of people don't know, unless you're working with people in the community, is that a lot of people who are out on the street, homeless people, suffer from traumatic brain injuries. And this is by policymakers and everything, a lot of times just thought to be a mental illness, and it's not. So that's just something that you learn if you're talking to people in the community that you might not know unless there's research that's been published on it. Back over 10 years ago, Atlanta announced it was going to demolish all of its public housing, all of it, including 2 senior high rises. And so we embarked on a study. The residents came to talk to us, the resident leadership. And we told them we certainly couldn't stop the demolitions, but we could document what happens to the residents. And that's what we did for 4 years, with lots of interference from the housing authority. It was a very challenging study. It was sad to see what the people went through. There's a lot there. And so my colleague, Dr. Aaron Rule, and I, who started this study, are trying to write a book that talks about our experiences as well as the residents. I kept a lot of journals. I'm trying to translate them or transcribe them on AI right now. It's not going well. But anyway, so the challenge of the book is to get the sort of the biography, the story of the study in there, but also get the findings and the policy implications in there. And so maybe the big overall objective is to have it be sort of a community-based book that doesn't just talk about the study findings and that sort of stuff. It just talks about the entire study. So wish us luck. It's a very challenging project. Dan and I can't really talk about this at this point, but we're embargoed, but we can at least give a little bit of information. We have been conditionally awarded money for, I'll just say, a statewide eviction response study, which will involve community partners across the entire state of Georgia, state partners, you name it. It's going to be a challenging project. And so the objective of the project in the end is to have eviction information in infrastructure across the state that can help prevent evictions. And there's all sorts of evictions. For those of you who studied in this area, there's, corporate investors in housing, who have big, huge property management companies who issue these evictions. And even if it doesn't go through, it will go on the person's record. So it's a complicated There's also something called self-help evictions, which you can't get records on. And that's basically when the landlord, whatever kind of landlord it is, threatens the resident, and the resident just leaves. And so another community study I worked on in the Over the Rhine neighborhood in Cincinnati, it was looking at some community supports for people living in subsidized housing that was owned by this huge firm called POA, Partnership for Affordable Housing, something like that. They have an enormous national portfolio. Well, they really weren't serious about giving the residents community support, as far as I'm concerned. And when COVID hit, there was a lot of self-help evictions. My colleague, Jim Fraser, and I just finished a paper on it, so we're sending it out. So, you know, non-community-based research is great. You can get at all sorts of trends and, you know, all sorts of things. And I don't want to say any, it's needed, it's necessary. When you get into the community, you discover all sorts of things that sort of get washed out with the broader picture. So I'll leave it at that because like Rita, I could talk for days. So why don't I just leave it there?
All right. I can talk a bit about some things. So, I mean, in terms of projects right now, Dr. Anderson already talked about the projects we have with within the ICORD lab and working on those projects. Another project is with a colleague here, Dr. Spring. We're working with the Georgia Community Action Association to look at how they are engaging the community and again, that's communities all across the state of Georgia, and sort of how are they using their funds, using their resources to try and engage these communities, and we're trying to help them with that. And I would say, you know, sort of going back to Dr. Anderson's point, a big part of what I do in this context is, you know, these, whether they're organizations or whether they're individual communities or whatever it is, they have a need that they can articulate. They need help with making their case, making, you know, providing research that actually justifies and supports the work that they are doing. And so projects that we can come in and work on that do that sort of thing, right? So in the context of GCAA, you know, they have been trying to make their own arguments about, you know, where they get their funding from and how they engage with the community and things for years. We can come in and offer an external sort of voice in that can do research on what they are doing. We can offer them improvements, but we can also give them the empirical you know, resources and the language to present their case further in terms of the work they are trying to do in there. And I would say that's a lot of what I have done. So like I said, the ICORD lab that I'm working on with Dr. Anderson, the GCA project with Dr. Spring, but previous projects where I've worked with Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation or the Georgia Appleseed Project or the Southern Poverty Law Center, all of these were in different ways around sort of questions around how educational resources were being allocated or how evictions were being conducted or, you know, housing inequalities in these spaces. And it was, how do we create rigorous, empirical, thoughtful research that can then be handed over to those communities or those groups that they can do the work they need to do, right? And you know, so we're supporting them in that way. And that's sort of how I sort of approach these projects.
Wow, these are amazing works and they spread across so many different areas. This is great. So I'm glad we have such a diverse panel. So you're talking about different projects, all of you. So how did these partnerships begin? How did you establish this trust, the shared goals with your, like, if you're a community partner, how did you develop that with your academic partner or the other way around? How did this partnership, this idea develop? Where did it start? Let's go alphabetically, I guess, again.
Sure. So I work in a hospital. right? So our questions come from the hospital. Additionally, another area that we get a lot of questions from, Shepherd Center is one of the top ranked rehab hospitals in the nation. And so when we go to conferences to present, we're often approached by other organizations, typically smaller, especially more rural areas where they're like, what's working well for y'all, because they do not have a research department and they do not have a large team of people being able to do these things. And so people often come to us, and from the questions that we're asked in conferences, just like in an academic setting, a lot of our projects roll out of that. Um, all of the projects that I work on for the hospital go back to one central question and one central goal. If it does not help us understand how to improve our patients' lives, we do not do it. That's just point blank simple. Everything has to pass that litmus test and align with the goals of the hospital. We have an extremely high return to home rate, and we have a very low hospital readmission rate. And so we really pride ourselves on centering our work around people with severe disabilities, how to help them thrive in their communities. And so everything goes back to that central tenet, whether it's the trauma commission analysis, the analytical sprints, the projects with the students, all of those things go back to that central mission. And so the partnerships are formed relatively organically. And so we have a specific need, and then we find the partner that is appropriate to address that need. But everything is research question driven and rooted in needs driven. I've never met a stranger to date is kind of like a joke that I hear about me, like very outgoing. And so Dan and I actually started working together because I admired his research and I wanted to expand into housing. A goal of rehabilitation is return to home. Dan studied housing. You can't really return to home if you don't have a home to return to. And so I approached Dan and I asked him, hey, would you please be willing to work with me on this research project? We did one very successful project together. And then that's how I like to start collaborations, is start on one project, see how it goes, and then go from there. But I am very agnostic as to who is my partner, as long as they work with and for an organization that aligns with the goals of my organization. So I have partners that are academic, those who are in industry, those who are retired, in all these different areas, because it all goes back to a core tenet. That does mean that my partnerships are biased towards those that I have a network connection with. And so we know this in sociology. And so having a really diverse and large network is going to be important. And then also failing quickly. And so I try to fail when I'm forming new partnerships. If we're going to fail, I want us to fail fast so that we can either figure out how to fix it or not be partners. So that's typically how partnerships are formed, through already established connections, shared research goals. And then when we do form, we try to fail quickly or be successful quickly to move forward from there.
That's
I know we've been
great.
going in ABC alphabetical order, but we may want to go to Dan since he is my core partner in a lot of these projects. He might be able to share his perspective on working together.
Yeah.
Sure, we can do that. Thank you, Rita. Yeah, I all I can do is echo in that in terms of these sort of the networks and sort of how this plays out. For me, it's two ways. In some sense, I've sought out some of these partnerships and these opportunities. So I used to work with the Public Justice Center in Baltimore before I took the position and came here to GSU, and so I really enjoyed doing that work. That was in Baltimore, and so when I got to Georgia, I was sort of like, well, what's the equivalent of the Public Justice Center in Georgia? And the closest thing I could sort of find to that was the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation, and so I just emailed them and said, like, hey, can we meet and have a conversation? And so things like that, were I wanted to find organizations that I thought would, be engaged and do the kind of work that I was interested in doing. And so I just set up a meeting and had lunch with the director, and we talked for a while, and some other things came out of it over time. And then the other way is people reaching out to me. So as Rita already pointed out, Rita caught me in the hallway one day and was like, "Hey, can we work on a project together?" I was like, "Sure, this sounds great." And same thing for the GCA project. We got to know the director of the Georgia Community Action Association, and she'd been telling us about, you know, a lot of the problems and the challenges they were facing in the current political environment, both within the state and nationally. And so, you know, in the end, we ended up meeting, Dr. Spring and I ended up meeting with her for lunch a couple of times over the space of a month or two, and sort of talk through, like, how can we support this? Like, what is this? What do you have in terms of data and projects, and what are you doing, and how can we help you? And we sort of built a project out of that. So very much on connections, and like I said, some of them that I've sought out because I wanted to be engaged in this space, and I knew I wanted to be in this area. I just didn't know who to talk to, so I just went and found people. And then in others that, you know, came to me. But in all of that, it's sort of there is a need, and how can I help you in that narrative? How help you in that project?
Thank you, Dan. Joy or Deirdre, whoever wants to go first.
I'm happy to talk a little bit. I really appreciate what both of you just said, because you half answered the question for me. Like Dr. Anderson, the Atlanta Regional Commission Area Agency on Aging has a very strict mandate that we are trying to fulfill. Our work is to identify the folks living in the region who have the highest social and economic needs and connect them with services. So the work that we do is largely about identifying those with the highest social and economic needs. We are also a regional convener. So we have the opportunity to partner with other agencies and individuals organically, like what Dr. Anderson was talking about, or the examples that Dr. Pasciuti provided, because we're just in spaces with people who are either doing work that is relevant for our mandate, or who are interested in learning more about how we do the work that we do, and identifying resources. I think that the personal connection and the network, I cannot understate that for the people on this meeting today. If you're interested in doing community engaged research, it's really important to have relationships with people in the community. So that's a big part of what we do on my team, is just try to identify the people with whom we need to make those relationships, and to make those relationships a priority. And then again, like coming back to the convening different partners who work in different worlds, whether that's academic or a tiny community serving organization, or the state government, trying to like bridge the connections between all of those different entities, so that we can actually influence outcomes with some of the community stories is a really important mission of our work. It is also a challenge of the work, but I think it's part of what keeps the community motivated, is knowing that we're trying to open up those paths and make those connections.
Yeah, I think what everybody said so far is definitely true. I think you have to be, you have to want to do it, community engaged research, and your relationships, and that has to come off when you're talking to potential community partners or residents in a neighborhood or whoever. I mean, if they just, there's something here in Atlanta, I don't know what you want to call it, but research burnout or participatory burnout, where there's so many universities around here. And so, we're all going into all these different neighborhoods, mostly disadvantaged Black neighborhoods, and wanting people to participate in our study. Hey, and you're going to get $25 if you answer my interview, kind of thing. And that's not enough for some people. There's something a resident said to me that has always stuck with me. How's your $25 going to change my life? All right. So that's just the kind of a backdrop. Community, the way you connect with community partners can happen in many, many different ways, as you've already heard. Sometimes it's organic, meaning, you you want to do something and you have to find community partners. So you reach out to people, or sometimes community organizations come to you because they want something done and they don't know how to do it. So it can happen both of those different ways. You have to like to talk to people. I'll say that. So, and you have to be able to listen. We did. I'm just trying to think. We did have a credit union approach us who happens to what do you call it? It's got its name on the GSU football stadium now. Park Credit Center.
Park Credit.
Parks. Yeah, Park Credit.
Sponsor, is that the word you're after?
Is it a sponsor? Yeah, you buy basically it. And they wanted to do a study about what would the Summerhill Peoplestown community want, because this was the old Brave stadium, and the GSU has done a lot of development there. And so we engaged with them. I would say that meant that it was harder to engage with the community organizations in Summerhill and Peoplestown because they're suspicious of anything corporate, and actually rightly so. And so that study didn't work out as well. And then the other thing is things can change really fast. So the credit union had this community department, and by the time we finished the study, that was no more. And so they weren't interested in our research anymore. So, I mean, that can happen. And also, as Dr. Anderson said, things can fail. And I agree with her. Fail fast if it's going to fail. I wouldn't say that particular study was a failure, but we really didn't get to engage in the community the way we wanted to. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think these are amazing pointers for anyone like me who's starting to be a community engaged researcher, like thinking about how the partnerships work, how established connections can be used, or making new connections. And like Dr. Anderson said, like try one project. If it doesn't work, okay, that ends there. Otherwise, you have a partner for lifetime. And the idea of like having similar interests, I like how Dan pointed out, like you can reach out to organizations. That's something that I've always struggled with. How do we find a community partner? So thank you, Dan, for that. And I'm glad Deirdre mentioned the participatory burnout, and all the conversations I've had around community partnerships or community engaged research. I think this is the most important part, and one of the main elements of community engaged research, that you have to give back to the community too, not just those $25, but more than that. So that is very important. So thank you for sharing all those insights. So my next question is, when community engaged research, you're collaborating with communities, with universities and your community partners, how does the power dynamics play? Like, how do you work together? Like we were just talking about the participatory burnout, but with the community, the participatory burnout, but also within the community partner and the university faculty, how do these dynamics work? And how do you navigate around them during the projects?
You want us to just jump in, or do you want to do it?
Just jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, there's a lot of, I mean, this goes back to points the other people have made that, it's the communication here is really important. I think having a very clearly defined idea of what this project is going to try to accomplish. I think the quickest, some of the quickest ways these things will fail is, you have an idea of doing X and their idea is not quite the same, and you didn't have a total like actual agreement about what this was that was going to be a product or whatever it was that was coming out of this partnership, and that starts to become, problematic as well. And that's not just even about outputs; it's also about timing, right? There's a huge problem with community engaged research is the I don't know if I want to use the word incompatibility, but there is the academic timeline and then there's the community timeline, and those don't often line up very well. We operate on the semesters. In our context, we operate semesters. Other people will do different things, but of sort of how we're sort of structuring our time in these ways. Of where we have bandwidth and where we have don't, and that ebbs and flows throughout both the context of a semester, as a whole entity, but even within a semester, right? So right now we're all buried in grading and trying to desperately get grades in and all that sort of stuff, and there's not a lot of bandwidth for other things at the moment. So that sort of communication and understanding about timelines, what the products are, become incredibly important in these conversations. And as others have already brought up, and Deirdre was, I think, alluding to very nicely, the context of the university. And one of the things I like about being at a public university is it is a public university, and sort of that public ethos of engagement and those sorts of things. But this is also a neoliberal university, and the context of how this idea of in community engagement has been sort of neoliberalized and sort of valuated in these ways that I think we have to be very careful of, because as the points have been brought up, right, like we are going into communities that are marginalized, generally speaking, do not have power. We're coming in, and then there's the question of the knower. Who's the knower in this space? Who has the we have the credentials, but they actually have the knowledge of the community, and you have to honor that in very ways. Otherwise, this becomes to start really problematic very quickly. I'll leave it to somebody else from there.
I'll kind of give a suggestion. Joel Best writes a really good social problems book that I think everyone should read that is interested in doing applied work. So it's Joel Best, B-E-S-T, pretty well-known researcher. He does a really good job of explaining claims makers and the importance of the different claims maker dynamics. And he talks about it under the umbrella of social problems, but I actually find myself referring back to that text quite a bit on how to work well with community partners, because there is a power dynamics is a constant thing you have to be in mind of, both in the organization and in academia. And so constantly in every project, I hear from both sides, people being like, well, I think I should be in charge. Well, I think that my ideas should be listened to. And I think part of that is the academy really teaches people to come up with research questions and to drive research questions and take agency of it. And so it can be really challenging for a lot of people to take that back seat. And this is not just in the academy. I experience this a lot at the hospital as well. I experience it with different commissions, different groups, not just the commission, because people often feel that if they pay for something, they have say of something. And so, or if it's my data, I get to determine what's done with it. And so how we address this is we come together and we form a research question, not I, not you, we. And we agree to what the goal is, and then we agree to a timeline, and then spend a notable amount of time, often what feels like unnecessarily, reminding people of what we're doing and why we're doing it and what our goal is. But if we all have faults, and if this is something, if you feel very strongly to always be in charge and you're to have the final say, it's going to be hard to do this kind of work well, because it needs to be a balance. And so I often have a conversation early on with stakeholders, usually one of the first meetings, and say, I'm here to provide research expertise. You're here to provide subject matter expertise. And together, we're going to be able to do this really great project. And it may feel kind of silly to do those things, but to go ahead and acknowledge that that's going to happen and acknowledge that's what we're going to be working with, I have found has really helped. And so I often get new collaborators in the room that kind of look at me like, what are you doing? Like that's very like odd or a weird thing to kind of say, but we're setting the standard from the beginning. I I have more expertise in this, what I'm being brought in for. You have the expertise of what you're being brought in for, and we're doing this together. And throughout the semester, we just wrapped up a project that I think if we said it once, we said it 10 times. We understand that's what you want to do. That's not what the stakeholder asked for. We understand that would be a cool analysis. We can do that after the project is over, but that's not what the stakeholder asked for. And so going back to what are your core research questions and what are your core roles really helps with this power dynamic. And again, I suggest that book. It's called just Social Problems by Joel Best. I think that it really outlines the importance of different people in projects in addressing social problems, which is different but adjacent to what we do here.
Thank you. Deirdre, you want to go?
I suppose I'll talk mostly about sort of what can happen between the university and your community engaged research. I don't know how many of you know Georgia State, but the main campus is just literally right downtown. So there's a lot of redevelopment efforts going on. The latest with GSU is Atlanta, our World Cup destination. And Georgia State got a lot of money to open up the campus to make it look more college-like. And it's going to be beautiful. There's no question about it. One of the tensions that's happening, which could potentially affect any of us who are dealing with populations of people who are precariously housed or become homeless, is the big question that comes up with all of this redevelopment going on and with the World Cup coming in is what's going to happen to all the homeless people who are around the campus. And there's a lot of them. And they already got kicked out of Hurt Park, which is right near us. And we do have colleagues in public health that do have a center. It's all about homelessness and health. And so it's very unclear what's going to happen. If what typically happens, the homeless people will just get driven out or criminalized. So there is sort of in the same thing with the Summerhill neighborhood. As soon as Georgia State announced that they were buying the former Braves Stadium, there's all these sort of alerts that came out in meetings about be careful what you study kind of thing, as to not sort of clash with the administration. For the most part, things get worked out, at least in my experience, but that's always a constant kind of thing in the back of your head that you have when you're doing this sort of research. Publicly, GSU absolutely supports community engagement of students, community engaged research, all of that sort of stuff. They publicly support it. So they don't want to be put in bad light. But I can tell you, because it will be in our book, that because the power of the housing authority, back when public housing was being demolished, the executive director of the housing authority then, his name was Renee Glover, got our IRB pulled right before we were starting data collection. Now, the IRB ended up going back to the housing authority and saying there's nothing activism or radical about this study. And so we were able to go forward. Georgia State supported us. But, you know, these kinds of things can happen. And it's sort of, you need to be cautious. Not do your research, just be cautious about it. I'm trying to think of what other things to think about it. And that's not going to affect the community organization. That's going to affect how you can do your work. What Dr. Anderson said about being clear and talking to people and making sure that you're together with your research agenda is so important. And you have to be very, very careful that there's no misunderstandings. And there will be, even if you are clear, even if everybody seems to be on the same page, but that's to be expected. So anyway, and then there's also the bureaucracy of if you get grant funding or if you have to go through legal at Georgia State for a contract or something like that. The community organizations might not understand that can delay things by a lot. We don't know what the lawyers do when they're like negotiating these things. It's like, what are you doing? But it takes a really long time. And so that's another thing to take into account. I suppose that's about it that I can think of off the top of my head.
Can I jump back in real quick? Just since you brought this up, Deirdre, I think it's a great point. This, that's where I was sort of alluding to in this tension, right? Like this neoliberal university that we exist within. One of my favorite anecdotes is, when I was potentially coming to GSU and I was being interviewed, I had a meeting with an associate dean, and that was right when GSU was looking to buy the Brave Stadium, and they were doing all this. And yeah, as an urbanist, I was like, "Oh, this is fascinating about what this is going to look like." And at the time, one of the deans I was interviewing me said was, well, our goal is to become the NYU of the South, talking about GSU. And I wanted the job, so I didn't say anything at the time in the interview. But in my head, I'm sitting there going, I understand what I think you think that means, but that means something very different to me. And I think it's really important. I like that anecdote, right, of thinking through these tensions that we have, right, as academics in these spaces, especially in the context of the university. And the university has this idea of a public ethos, and we're supposed to be here for the community. But it's also an institution that is doing its own thing. And, we're in the process of driving out, as Dr. Oakley mentioned, we're in the process of driving out the homeless and taking over the parks in our area to turn ourselves into a more traditional looking campus. But the university at the same time is very happy when we do these community engaged projects, right? They get to hold them up and talk about student, engagement and learning and all these sorts of things. So, it is a tension and a line that you have to sort of balance about, what you can do for the community and what you want to do and what your institution is going to make of that or even do with it. And it's just something to be very careful and aware of.
I do want to mention one other thing because it didn't get brought up is when you're publishing with community partners, you need to have early conversations about authorship order and expectations about what will be published. And so we write these into our memorandum of understandings and our business associate agreement and our data sharing agreement. So MOUs, BAAs, DSAs. We have a very clear understanding of how do we determine what gets published, and then if it gets published, who is what author. And so by default, different institutions have different cultures. The culture at our institution is both groups have to agree to the final product before that product is sent out. And so let's say that we partner with a community organization. Both the hospital and the community organization approves the final product before it's put out. And this is so that there's no question about what is being said. Because if you're using the community's data or the hospital's data, they want to know what's going to be put out there and the framing in which it occurs. And so having those early, clear conversations that are documented is going to be important, and a plan of how you're going to do that. Because we know that people in academia, it's very important to publish often in a certain journal at a certain level, and they need a certain authorship as well. And so having those conversations early on, both with grants, publications, presentations, all of that, if you document that early and make that process very transparent, it will save you a lot of time. But that's a key power dynamic that often causes issues if that's not talked about early on. Somebody who does this really, really well, better than anybody else I know, is Lion Kasabian. She is a sociologist at the University of Nebraska, and she historically works with First Nation or Native American tribes, and she does it beautifully. She does a very good job of making sure that they approve what's put out about them using their data. And so she may be someone, if you're wanting to think about this more, to kind of look to as a good example of doing this well in the applied sociology space.
I'm really glad I get to go last, because I work for the government. So if you think power is tricky when you work for a university, try working for the government. No, I'm just kidding. Well, I'm not kidding. Actually, I don't work for the government. I do want to clarify that the Regional Commission is quasi-governmental. We're not actually part of the government. But all of the issues that I encountered when I was still working primarily at the university are present in our work around power and how we negotiate power, but it really is amplified. And in some ways, for me, universities do have a reputation in some circles for being advocates and for including scholars who want to promote research that benefits communities. So when you show up in a community, particularly one like what Dr. Oakley described, that has been marginalized for centuries and is full of it's primarily Black community, and they've had a lot of disinvestment in their neighborhood, and you say, I work for this organization that is part of the government. It's very difficult to negotiate trust in that community for good reasons. There are also all of the bureaucratic issues around funding and how we get funded and maintaining the relationships and the points of contract that we set out with. Our contracts, having worked at GSU for decades, it's even slower at ARC, our contracts and legal, and they even have a bigger micro magnifying glass that they're looking at things with. I think there are reasons for that are probably outside my level of understanding in the organization. But I think that what I really value about the way ARC handles that is that they do hire people like me and that my colleagues on my team. Aaron Yost is a critical geographer who I work closely with, and they make sure that we get out into different opportunities to engage with folks like the people who are on this panel. So I spend a lot of time going to like public health conferences or community talks. And community engaged research is really taught in those spheres, so that when my team comes back, we have learned those principles and those methods so that we can bring them into the work that we're doing, even if what we're doing doesn't, it can't call itself community engaged research or be published in an academic journal, because we don't work for an organization that endorses publication in academic journals. I also want to revisit something that Dr. Oakley said, which I think is so important, which is that you can't do this work and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, please jump in, Deirdre, if I say it in a way I shouldn't, but you can't do this work if you don't like to talk and if you don't like to listen. And that has served me particularly. I have found that the best community engaged research requires liking listening and being able to talk. So I think that that helps address some of the power dynamics, because if you're not the one doing all the talking, then you are able to give power to the voices who are doing the talking. And so a big part of my role, I think, is to do the work of community engaged research, and then behind the scenes, share the findings of our work so that we might have some influence upstream on some of the more macro level decisions, or even just conversations that are happening, so that when decisions are made, community voices have been amplified. So anyway, that's how we do it. That's how we deal with power a little bit in our role.
Just one more thing, just to add, liking the people, and just being sort of compassionate about the situations that they're in. I mean, I think that has to be genuine, unless you're a really good actor, which I'm not. But I find it, I love being out in the community and learning all this stuff, and it can be emotionally draining at times, but you also come out of it realize, I mean, yeah, privilege is real, and nothing like going into some of these neighborhoods and talking to people and coming home and going, wow. So you got to have a passion for it. I think you really do. And if you don't, do something else. There's plenty of other things to do in sociology or the social sciences that's really important. So anyway.
Thank you so much. This was very powerful, talking about the power dynamics and thinking about all these academic and organizational constraints and how to work as a we and not I. It is very important. I'm glad you guys brought the conversation to publications and authorships. So what are the challenges have you faced when communicating research findings to different audiences, such as like community members or collaborating with them, policymakers and academic journals? Like, how does that work out? Like, what strategies do you use to make the research more accessible and useful? Whoever wants to go first.
I could go first. We have so many tools today, in terms of visualization and maps. I love maps. And so, there's plenty of ways of going about it. Typically what we've done is issued policy briefs that, are written very, very clearly. And we try and include the residents' voices. I like to take a lot of photographs. And I don't know, for some of our reports, we did a study in Galveston, Texas, after the hurricane. I forget the name of that hurricane. Basically, the residents in power just was like, we're not going to rebuild the public housing. Good. They can all leave. And what we found out going down there, that, everybody who lost their housing had gotten a disaster relief voucher, and they were living in Galveston, just not in public housing. And so, the reports can take on many kinds of forms, but one thing that I like doing that is not high tech is to have these photographs, not necessarily people, it can be whatever you see that looks interesting, and then have a quote from a resident underneath it. And do that throughout the report so people can get a feel for what people in the community are talking about. So, there's that. There's also, I haven't been able to get this to work yet, but we have, with a couple of studies, given residents, cameras to do photo voice. And then, I had this big idea that we could do like an exhibit of the photographs with quotes underneath. Well, what happened in this particular study, this goes back a couple of years, but it can happen in a different form today, is we just had these little mechanical cameras, and people are taking the batteries out for their remote controls for their TV. And so we ended up not getting very many pictures. There was a presentation at a community engaged conference that I participated in a couple of weeks ago, where somebody did do a really good photo voice study and did this very visual sort of report that involved the residents. And, I was very impressed with it. Okay, so then there's the other part, we all have to get publications out. That seems to me to be the easiest part. If you've got people in the community that are going to participate in those, what Dr. Anderson has said is absolutely correct. Typically with our studies, it's more graduate students that participate in these, and you just got to make things really clear with them. I've experienced flakeouts where people disappear, it's these sort of things just happen. But the other thing that I will say is, if you get stuff out in the media, that can really help publicize your study. It's hard. I was able to testify before Congress, not because of any of our policy briefs or any other things that we had published regarding our public housing study, because I wrote an op-ed that was featured in the Christian Science Monitor, and immediately, oh God, what's her name? I forget her name. She's still a Democratic senator. Immediately, I got a call from her aides wanting me to come to Washington in 2 days and testify. Do I think that testimony made any difference? No. But it's on record for a graduate student someday who wants to do their dissertation on the destruction of public housing in the United States. So anyway, there are lots of creative things you can do with the technology today. And then, there's things that you are required to do. If you have a funder, you're required to have a final report. And of course, your university wants you to publish in peer review outlets, which typically get read by other academics. So, but anyway, there's lots of a variety of things you can do, especially with the technology today. I'll stop there.
Whoever wants to go next.
Rita, do you want to talk about what we did in that first project, or do you want me to, or I was thinking about it. So, and so that's why I was offering you, Rita, because this was your idea and this your project. So I learned this from you. One of our first projects, we did it as what am I trying to think? Academic publication, right? We're pulling data together, and we did it as a just sort of more traditional academic publication. But then after that, pieced it out into a white paper that then we also broke apart as both a national sort of understanding of the situation of this was on issues of housing for disabled populations in the United States, but also by state. And then I learned how to do things like mail merge, and we did a whole thing on for each state, got its own sort of specific version of that white paper. And we ended up printing them out and sending them to state representatives and senators and various housing organizations within each state. I don't know. What was it in the end, Dredo? Was that how many we sent out? It was like several hundred.
750.
Okay, there you go. 750. We sent out 750 different versions of this white paper to representatives, state organizations, housing organizations within each state, just basically telling them what big overview of like what we'd found, and then using the empirical article, the academic article, as the reference and the justification in the background of saying, if you want more detail, if you want the specifics on this, go here, but here's the big highlight about what's going on in your state and how your state compares to everyone else. And so, I had been on projects before where, right, you do the project and you write a report for the community organization or the organization that you're working with. And then, maybe you write some sort of other paper that is, what they're going to use to go to, political organizations or groups or, senators, those sorts of people. And then you go off on your own and you write your academic one. I'd never been part of a thing before where we wrote the academic and then we said, well, okay, how do we convert this into something that is publicly accessible and then put it in front of people that, most of them are going to ignore it. Most of them are going to throw it away, but, at least we get it out there. And for some of them, maybe it becomes helpful and it's something that allows them to, at least put context to some of these questions that they're trying to grapple with.
In addition to that project, we just wrapped up a project that I think is a really good example. So we did a major project for an organization. We presented it at a mini conference to an academic audience. We reformatted that to present it to a hospital audience, and then we reformatted that to present to the community itself. And so we took the same information and framed it based on the audience and the time frame that we had. But rather than kind of saying, all y'all have to fit into this model, we went to who we are presenting to and we fit the presentation to them. And so very begrudgingly, I think at times the students were like, well, we should just give them one. And that was a good opportunity to have a conversation around, you have to meet people where they are and give them what they need. And so that we basically made the most complicated presentation, the largest presentation, and then we paired it to the different audiences, including a handout. And so that's something that we do as a best practice and we do regularly. A second thing that we do regularly is we take our publications and we turn them into white papers. And so doing a 1-page to 2-page summary of key findings, what data were used and things like that. The truth is, the brilliant work that's being done and published is awesome. Very few people are able to access it, and those who do access it often only use it to cite for their own work. And so something that we have found that's really powerful is being able to publish and then turn around and have that 1 to 2-page summary with the citation there. So people have the ability to go seek out that publication if they want, or they can access that information through the shorter report. I love an example of people who do this well. Brandeis University's disability policy group is exceptional at doing this, and they make them accessible research summaries on top of that. And so this is a way that you get both to the scientific community, but also the community that you're serving, which is really what these partnerships are about.
I just want to underscore the effectiveness of that method. And, a big part of my job is bridging communities and whether that's the state level government or mayors of the municipal partners in our counties, or like I said before, small community serving organizations. I love this method that Dr. Anderson is describing, particularly with a 1 to 2-page handout. And I think the audience that hasn't been mentioned that can really benefit from those are the bureaucrats who are informing the conversations that are actually had. There are hundreds of people who are working on, initiatives like transportation policy or housing policy at multiple levels, state, regional, county. city. If you can get a one-page document in the hands of the 10 people who have to work together to make a decision about how the new development is going to be zoned, that is a powerful tool. So I really want to thank you for that good work, and hope that I continue to lay hands on it so that I can take it to my colleagues and my contacts.
Jada, do you want to add anything, or I can go with the audience question? Okay. One of our Mahala Stewart asked a question. I'm curious if anyone can speak to challenges, benefits of working with students or deciding not to in community engaged research. I'm at an undergraduate serving institution, so it would be undergrads, not grads, working with me.
Sure, I can start off on that. I mean, yes, working with students is challenging. There is no, can also be very rewarding, as we all know, but very challenging. I would say it probably partially depends on the context of how your institution can deal with these types of classes. I will give GSU credit. I don't give GSU credit for much, but I will give them credit for this. They have created classes. I'm forgetting what the undergrad version is called now. The graduate versions we call domestic field schools, but there's a term for the undergraduate thing. But basically, they can sign up for the same class multiple semesters and get credit for it. And that was something that took a lot of bureaucratic change within the university, on the idea that you could sign up for the same class 2 semesters in a row and somehow get credit for it. But once it was, that does change the dynamics. And so EPIC, that's what we call them, EPIC. I don't remember what it stands for, but it's called an EPIC class here. But what that's allowed, I mean, not only in terms of stuff that we've done, but where I've seen colleagues do this in other departments, is it allows you, right? This goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning about the timeline problem in these things. We have a semester, and a semester is both long and short, right? Certainly in the context of working with a community, it's a short timeline to get them up to speed on what you're doing and why you're doing it, and then actually do any research and get anything accomplished. If you can have a situation where the students know that this is a project that is longer, potentially longer than a semester, and and they would be willing and interested in to continue, that creates not that all of them have to continue, but if enough of them continue, or a small subset of them continue, then that knowledge doesn't have to be completely reproduced from scratch every semester. So one of the best examples I've seen of that actually here was somebody in I think it was the English department. But they were, Deirdre, do you remember who was doing the Krog Street Bridge project where they were taking the pictures?
It was Kurt.
Kurt, thank you.
That's right. Yeah.
In the history department.
In the history department, yes, thank you. So he ran this project for, I don't know, at least a year, maybe even longer, where every semester they were going in there. We have this bridge called the Krog Street Bridge, where there's a lot of graffiti that's put on it, and it's a public space that is allowed to have graffiti on it, and it changes all the time. And so they were documenting it, and he would take students over there and they would take pictures, and they were literally documenting how not only how graffiti changed over time, but like how long certain things would stay up. So, a piece of graffiti that was to someone who had passed would stay up longer before it was sprayed over versus some other form of messaging or something along those lines. But because it was operating in this format, he had this core group of students that stayed with the project for at least 2 semesters or so. And I would say that's the same thing even in the context of the graduate side of things, that they don't all have to follow you, but as long as there is a core subset that move with you from semester to semester on this project, that can be there to help direct the others and not have to rebuild, like I said, everything from scratch at the start of the semester, that works very well. If you are trying to rebuild a project from scratch every semester, it is exhausting.
I would suggest doing one project without students first and figuring out what works well and doesn't work well, and then making very discrete and clear roles, especially in the undergraduate framework. That's how I learned research methods by doing a project for a city. I learned statistics by analyzing data for a partner because back to like I was trained from the core as an applied sociologist. And so how they did this successfully in the undergraduate course was they often partnered up who was teaching classes in areas in which the study would be directly related. And so let's say you're doing a study on accessing city services, so maybe like an urban class and then a research methods class. And so, or if you have a qualitative and a quantitative class, maybe the qual class does some interviews, the quant class does some surveys. And so it took some foresight. And so what a lot of the strongest projects did was they had a quick win. And this was something that kind of talked about in the more formal, informal relationships. Have a quick win and then plan a bigger project out that has a lower expectation of deliverables for your first couple of projects, but making really clear goals for students. I will say that one of the students is actually here, and I won't call them out because I don't want to embarrass them, but our recent project would have completely failed without them. They were a brilliant project manager, did a really great job, sent out the weekly updates of like, here's what's coming up, here's what we did, here's what we need. And they kept all of those things really organized. And to be fair, they are an exceptional student. However, once you find those right people and they move with you throughout, they are learning, but they are clearly core assets to the project. And so I would suggest doing a project on my own and then keeping like a log and a journal of this is how long this took, this is what was needed, here's unexpected issues. And then the second round, finding ways to strategically bring in students. And then maybe the third round or later, doing a more full project with stronger student engagement, but being extremely strategic because as somebody who has taught both very advanced methods classes and less advanced methods classes at our projects, the projects take a lot more work and they're so dynamic. You can't really rinse and repeat materials from semester to semester. And so just being cognizant of those different dynamics, I think is important. But I hope you do it. It is more work, but it's definitely worth it. And it is so beneficial to the students because then when they come and interview with me and they come interview with Joy, they're not talking about a hypothetical ability to do a project. They have done a project and they have worked with stakeholders. And that's one of the most valuable skills that we can hire into roles that we have.
I'll just first of all let me just focus on undergrads, since you're from an undergrad, college. I'm assuming. Williams College has done some amazing things with undergrads. They had in the I don't know why it ended. Well, one of the professors retired. They had this amazing program where they had an ethnography class, and the professor knew somebody at CUNY, and they would take the students down. They did all this work ahead of time, take the students down to New York for, I don't know what it was, a week or whatever, and they would actually go out there and do some sort of ethnography and then come back and write it up. The students loved it. Now, that wasn't a research project. It was more of a community engaged class. But a friend of mine who's at Williams has been doing all this work with, there's a lot of local farmers. And interestingly enough, there's a fair amount of Williams students who are interested in farming and planting and all this sort of stuff. So she basically has these research projects. It could be farming, it could be rural planning. And she has a group of students who go out and work on them. And they've all been very successful for the students and for her. So, I know because I'm from that environment and went to a liberal arts college that it's like, oh, you can't do research with undergrads kind of thing. That's not true at all. You certainly can. And a lot of times they're better than the grad students. Now, let's go to GSU. It used to be really easy to hire undergrads on research projects. Now it's become incredibly hard. So it's very easy to have them as an intern or in a domestic field school, but to get them paid becomes a nightmare. And I'm not sure why that happened, but it's something to do with, I don't know what it's to do with, not wanting them to work so many hours. What Dan and Rita have done, and me to a lesser extent, we have a BA MA program and an applied MA program. Those students are great, absolutely wonderful to work on data collection. And of course, they're not funded through the department. So what you can do is you can give them enough money to get a tuition waiver. And then the way like Dan and Amy Spring and Rita organize these things is that they also take part in this domestic field school as well. I've been really impressed with them, those that have worked on my studies. And it's another way of doing something. The BAMA students are, I haven't met one I don't like. They're very driven. And then, of course, here we have PhD students we can fund on projects. We have excellent students. Rafia is a prime example. Joy, before she graduated, we have lots and lots of really, really good students. We also have some terrible ones that, I'm just being honest, who don't do the work, who create problems. And I think that it's just sort of like what Dr. Anderson said before. You want an early fail so you can get rid of them. Of course, because this is a bureaucracy, if you do something like that, they might file a formal complaint against you. So I want to emphasize that these are in the minority, but they can cause a lot of problems.
Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you for the appreciation.
Actually, could I add in? You did bring up a good point that I wanted to mention, Deirdre, that this is how one of the ways that we've done some of this stuff is that, especially for projects that ultimately have a little bit of funding behind them, what we've done is created like sort of layered or tiered elements within a project. And what I mean by that is we'll offer it as a course, and then they can get course credit. And then we may also offer them, in our case in GSU, as long as they make $2,000, we can offer them a tuition waiver in the course of a semester. And so we'll offer them $2,000 as a sort of stipend, and then they work for us additionally as part of that as additional hours per week on the project. And so that's a way, in some of the context of what we've been able to do with using students, is instead of just having the class credit time, right? The 3-hour credit plus, some time outside of class that would be for homework and things like that. We combine it and say, okay, you're going to work for us for 4 hours a week. You're going to be in the class for 3 hours a week. And then in some cases, we've added on additional with some students that are really engaged of adding on something like a directed reading or an internship with the community organization or the organization we're working with for another 3 hours a week, right, is like an internship thing. And so we've sort of stacked time in there. And so then some of these students aren't just working for, 4 hours or 6 hours a week on a project. Some of them end up working for like 10 or 12 hours a week on a project. And when you start getting a few students who are doing more like 10 or 12 hours a week or even more on a project, you can push things, things can be pushed forward very quickly, even in the context of a semester.
Thank you. We have run out of time, but these were really interesting conversations. I know we have some questions. What I can request our panelists is I can send them an email and they can answer if that's okay with them, and I can forward that to our membership and whoever was attending the event. But thank you so much, all our panelists. This was really informational. It was very helpful. I've learned a lot during this session. I know I've worked with some of you. I've known all of you, and I've known your work, but I've still learned so much from today's conversations. These are conversations, I guess, some of them I've never had with you guys. So thank you. I really appreciate it. I will be reaching out to you with the questions. Thank you, Rada, for answering one of them in the chat. And thank you, Joy, for sharing the links. And thank you, Rada, for sharing the links in the chat too. So I really appreciate all of that. Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you.
one.
Thank you, Rafia, and thank you everybody for coming. This is an impressive turnout.
Thank y'all. And we stayed. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Thank
stayed.
you. It's awesome.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
You
Bye
too.
bye. Have a
Thank you
good
so much for
weekend.
doing this, Rafia. This was awesome.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you.